didn't process that, but then we heard the pop, 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 pop sounds. And my wife, though she's deaf, actually heard the sounds and knew immediately it was gunfire. I didn't react anywhere nearly as quickly as she did. And we started to run. The restaurant we were in was on the beach, which is about 3 to 4 meters below the promenade. And there was a cooking area and serving area, toilets and whatnot underneath the promenade for this restaurant. And we started to run toward that. And people started diving off the promenade. It was completely surreal, diving off onto the beach, onto the roof of the restaurant. One person fell and actually fell on top of my wife, injuring her arm. She's fine now, just a nasty bruise. And we went with other people in the restaurant and people who had dived down, and we took cover in a toilet stall. There were about 10 people in the one toilet stall we were in. We were there for some time. We kind of all then started coming out, and then maybe an hour and a half in, we got word to go back in, retreat back as far as we could. Never learned why. And then about 2 hours after we were there, we were told to evacuate. We went to a hotel about 150 meters down the beach to the east called the Negresco, where the injured were being treated. The police were questioning people. They were giving us water and blankets and whatnot. And then about 3 hours after the whole thing started, 1:30 in the morning, we were allowed to go back to our hotel, which Westminster, in between, it was right across from the restaurant we were at. We couldn't walk down the promenade, so we had to go by a back road through the Hyatt and then onto the promenade and walk the 100 or so meters from the Hyatt to our hotel. And you could see bodies everywhere. I thought they were covered in sheets. It turns out, we learned later, they were covered in tablecloths from the restaurant. And there was blood and destruction everywhere.
There were so many bodies that restaurants along the promenade helped out. They gave their tablecloths to cover the bodies there, to give them whatever dignity they could at that point. Eric, it must have just felt like a war zone. It must have felt like you were in a war for those several hours.
It did feel like it. I've never been in the military and never been in a war zone, but I can only imagine this had to be a lot like what it was. You didn't know what was happening. Everybody was clearly frightened, not just because people were separated from friends, family, and whatnot, but because we didn't know what was going to happen. Because we were on the beach, we couldn't see what was happening on the promenade. We didn't know if it was one person, lots of people. We didn't know if it was a coordinated attack. All we knew was we were scared.
Can you talk to us about what kind of security that you had seen? I mean, this was a big celebration. We've been told barricades were up, but what kind of security did you see that evening when you were there?
So we started our holiday 2 weeks ago in Paris, and there were armed police everywhere you turned in Paris. We went from there to Aix-en-Provence, and again, there was a pretty substantial police presence. There wasn't much of a police presence in Nice that we could see. I understand that earlier in the evening there was a military parade of some sort. We did not come out for that. We came to the promenade about 7:30, 7:45, went for a walk before dinner. Our reservation was at 8:30. And honestly, I don't recall seeing any police, or at least any substantial police presence on the promenade when we went for our walk and then to dinner. Earlier in the week, on Sunday night, we wanted to go to the fan zone for the Euro football finals and chose not to because there was a very large police presence there, but we chose not to because we were concerned about there were 2 pinch points to get into the fan fest area, the fan zone, and we thought if anything was going to happen, it was going to happen there, and people could really be hurt if there were a stampede. Turns out we prepared for the worst and nothing happened there, but last night we were completely unprepared. We didn't expect anything to happen. It was an incredibly festive evening.
It's a sign of the times, Eric, that this had been in your thoughts on your vacation already, and then tragedy still fell last night. Well, we are glad you're okay. We are so sorry you had to go through this. Our best to your wife, who is recovering as well. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you so much. Let's bring in right now Tom Verney. He's a law enforcement consultant and former NYPD detective. Tom, you've actually been sitting with us here while we heard from the French prosecutor, and we've heard these horrible stories of what people live through and those who are lost. When you see what we now know as just the facts that there are an 18-ton refrigerated truck plowing through a barricade, plowing through people, going for 2 kilometers, over a mile, and continuing to travel before it was stopped. Could that happen here?
Oh, very easily it could happen here. Yeah, this is what's known as, excuse me, in the terrorism world. So you have hard targets and soft targets, right? So, a hard target would be a building like the White House, something that's heavily guarded. It's nearly impossible to get into. And then you have soft targets where you have gatherings of people. It could be movie theaters, could be schools. And this is where terrorists now are looking more and more to commit these acts because they can just easily get into something like a truck. They don't necessarily need a bomb. You could do a lot. Look how much damage was done just with that truck. So you can do so much damage not having necessarily any other tools and materials that a terrorist would want, such as weaponry, grenades, or what have you. You just take a truck and plow through a crowd of people, and there's a ton of damage that's done there. Almost as many lives lost here as there was in the last attack that they had in France not too long ago.
Yeah, as simplistic as it was almost as deadly as that coordinated attack that we saw before in Paris. At events here in New York, though, whether it be the fireworks or when dignitaries come.
Or all the parades that we see go down.
It does seem like they take precautions. I mean, we've seen pictures of trucks, big giant trucks with sand that block intersections to make sure that vehicles can't get by. This is something that I know is in some of the planning here.
Oh, yeah. Well, any parade, I mean, New York City has parades all the time, especially during the summertime. So the police can do, but only so much, though, really, when it comes down to it. Because when you're talking about not only the amount of people who are participating in the parade. Thousands, right? And then the spectators, tens of thousands, right? Again, you just take one wayward truck goes down one street that we're not counting on, and you run over a couple hundred people. That's a really awful day. So the police try to do everything that they can. To my knowledge, based on the contacts that I have, I don't believe there's any threats that are against New York City at this point. I do know that the NYPD has stepped up with extra security at critical locations, including some of the embassies, such as the French embassy. So they immediately go into a heightened state of alert. As a matter of fact, France was on a heightened state of alert.
State of emergency.
State of emergency. They were supposed to be coming off that.
Exactly.
And it still happened. So for as much planning as you can try to do to thwart these threats, there's really never enough ways you can do that. That's why it's imperative that people keep their eyes and ears open to things that are just not fitting into place and alerting the authorities as soon as they can.
Sobering. Tom Verney, thanks so much for being with us. Appreciate it. Next, this is the 3rd major terror attack in France in just the past 18 months. And you know what? There have been several more in between. Is this the new normal for France? What about Europe? And what about the United States? Fareed Zakaria joins us to discuss next.
I drive a golf ball.
I drive to the hoop.
I drive a race car.
I have a driver.